Hello, friends. This is Debbie. Welcome to the Living Library. Today we're going to be reading this book. And let me show you the back. So it is called John Reynolds' Dragons. So John Reynolds' Dragons. It is the story of J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, I haven't read the book. You know me. I don't do that a lot. But who is J.R.R. Tolkien? Do you know? Before J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Hobbit, he was a young boy who saw dragons in the world all around him. The idea of dragons thrilled him. He liked to imagine dragons when he was alone with his friends and when life got hard or sad. But as much as he looked for a dragon, he never actually found one until one day when he was a grown man, but still very much a boy at heart, he decided to create his own. So we're going to be reading, this is John Ronald's Dragons, the story of J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote the Hobbit book. John Ronald was a boy who loved horses and trees and strange sounding words. But most of all, John Ronald loved dragons. Dragons that flew through the clouds, dragons that breathed sizzling flames, dragons that tied themselves in knots, dragons that wore shining scales, and dragons that guarded ancient treasure. John Ronald fed sugar cubes to the milkman's horse. He swung from the branches of beech trees with his little brother. So it sounds like he was a fairly normal little guy. Yeah, doing normal boyhood things. His mother read him stories about brave knights who battled dragons, but in safe Sarehole, a small town in Britain's Midlands, no actual dragons flew through the clouds, only geese and sometimes a hawk. At school, John Ronald made good friends. The boys held secret parties in the library with tea and biscuits. The librarian scolded them for dropping crumbs on her clean floor. Well, first off, look at that library. Wow, that's a great library. Has a bell in it too. And now we'll come a little closer. They acted in plays and they played rugby. They sketched pictures and made jokes. But at school, there were no dragons that breathed sizzling flames. Only the headmaster who smoked a pipe. On vacations from school, John Ronald visited his cousin Mary, and they made up their own language. They have a section in here I'm supposed to read Hobbit, or a language. Darfst mavel gam koplat haks go iskili far mena wak. Prosigo fis do rakde du kat im meno bakta de volt fact sak matimful gi rock. There it is. Which meant there was an old man who said, "How can I possibly carry my cow? For if I was to ask it to get in my basket, it would make such a terrible row." And so there they are, and they're laughing about that. The grown-ups shrugged their shoulders. At his cousin's house, there were no dragons tied up in knots. Only John, Ronald, and Mary, who tied themselves in knots, laughing at their own private language. Then John Ronald's mother died. He and his brother moved in with their aunt. She didn't like boys, and her house was cold and lonely. At night, John Ronald dreamed of exploring a steamy dragon's den. But in the morning, when he walked into his aunt's kitchen, nothing warmed the room. Only a thin wisp of steam rose from his lumpy oatmeal. So here's a picture of him going down the stairs, thinking he might see a dragon. But instead, that's all there was. Lumpy oatmeal. On the way from his aunt's house to school, John Ronald stopped at the church. There he helped Father Francis perform the morning mass. He carried a cross up the aisle and he rang the altar bell. Of course, he didn't find any dragons at the church, but he did find stillness and beauty and peace. After some time, John Ronald moved to a boarding house, and there he met a girl with bright eyes and shining black hair. He fell in love and asked her to marry him, and she agreed to do that. For a while, he forgot to look for dragons with shining scales. He only had eyes for Edith as she played scales on her piano. All of a sudden, the whole world went to war. John Ronald had to go too. He trudged through mud. He slept in a trench. He heard loud guns. For as far as he could see in any direction, the war had destroyed all the green trees. He tried to shut out the noises of war by making up another imaginary language. It didn't work. It was then that he most needed dragons. But of course, there were no dragons on the battlefield, only ugly machines belching flame. When John Ronald came home, he got a job teaching at the University of Oxford. He gave lectures, he went to meetings, he tutored students, he graded many, many exams. When he could escape from his work, he ate fish and chips at the pub with his friends. Sometimes they read each other stories they had written. But there was still no dragons guarding treasures, only silent gargoyles guarding buildings. Then one day, John Ronald was grading exams, and he came to this blank page. He wrote on the page, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." He didn't yet know what a hobbit was, and it wasn't a dragon, but he followed it anyway. So he wrote on the page, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." On school holidays in winter, when the fire was lit and the tea kettle was whistling, John Ronald told his children stories about the Hobbit, who, by the way, he named Bilbo Baggins. He gave Bilbo hairy feet. Bilbo lived in a cozy underground home in the Shire. But most of all, Bilbo led John Ronald over the misty mountains. Oh, through the Mirkwood Forest. Where next? And across the long lake to the base of the lonely mountain. Oh, and there at last, John Ronald found his dragon. And deep under the lonely mountain, there still lives a dragon that flies through the clouds and breathes sizzling flames. A dragon that wears shiny scales and guards ancient treasures. Do you know what his name is? His name is Smog. All right. So it gives us a very long story, but that's for older people, and we won't read it. Wasn't that a great, interesting story? And do you wonder why or how John Ronald is J.R.R. Tolkien? That is something for you to discover. Go ask your parents, Google it. So we'll talk to you next time.